Most people don't quite grasp how long eternity really is. They usually mix it up with some vague notion of infinity. But I got my own personal taste of eternity, and for me, it stretched exactly 15 years, 2 months, 27 days, and a few odd hours. And it came to an end just like it began, with my wife, Monica, sharing a smitten look and a deep kiss with someone special. Only back then, I was that someone. Right there when I slid that engagement ring onto her finger and asked her to be mine for all time. But fast forward to a recent night, and the scene was entirely different. I was sitting across the room, watching her exchange that same look, that same kiss, with someone else. I'd found myself, by sheer chance, in a restaurant 2 towns over, looking at Monica cozying up with another woman as they stole glances and shared that all-too-familiar kiss. How I landed in the exact same spot as them isn't the point. The location, far from home, was her attempt at keeping things under wraps. What started as mild curiosity turned to shock, revulsion, and burning anger. As I watched it all unfold, there was a split second where I imagined myself marching right over to their table. But I was raised better than that. Never raise a hand against a woman, no matter the reason. So I stayed rooted in my seat, dumbfounded. Monica and her date clearly felt safe enough to indulge, knowing no one would recognize them here. They took their sweet time, savoring their meal between rounds of flirting and whispered exchanges. Meanwhile, I nursed my meal at a snail's pace, had dessert, and kept my eyes glued to their display. A storm of emotions brewing inside me, from rage to helpless disbelief. When they finally finished and strolled out hand in hand, I sat there feeling like the world's biggest fool. We'd been married for over 14 years, with 2 years of exclusive dating before that, and not once had I suspected she might be attracted to women too. Monica had never hinted, never dropped even a casual mention about it, not in any conversation we'd ever had. All these years, I thought I knew her inside and out. I'd pictured us growing old together, side by side. But this new discovery of her dual interests was nothing compared to the gut-wrenching realization that she was cheating on me. Whether with a man or a woman didn't matter. She'd given her affection, her loyalty, to someone else, stomping on the promises we made all those years ago. That ring I'd put on her finger was supposed to mean forever, a forever that now had an expiration date. Settling the bill, I climbed into my car and started the slow drive home, the weight of it all pressing on me. Monica had no idea I'd be back earlier than expected for my business trip. I'd wrapped everything up ahead of schedule, and instead of coming home Saturday afternoon, I'd made it back on Friday night. I'd left early Monday morning, and aside from missing Monica and the kids, the days without intimacy had left me restless in more ways than one. But after what I just witnessed, those urges were the last thing on my mind. I was only an hour from home when I decided to stop for dinner, take a break from the road, and that's when everything unraveled. Our kids are 12 and 10, old enough for Monica to go out alone for a night, which normally wouldn't bother me. But now, I found myself wondering if they knew what she was up to. Maybe they were as clueless as I'd been. Either way, they wouldn't be too happy once they found out. On the drive back, I ran through every possible angle. Was it my fault? How long had this been going on? I guess, in a twisted way, at least I didn't have to worry about her lover being better in bed than me. Gallows humor, I know. When I walked in at 9, Monica still hadn't returned. Emily, 12, and Hannah, 10, gave me a warm welcome, but I barely registered it, still trying to process everything. I knew Monica wouldn't expect me back this soon, but the same couldn't be said for me. I was the one left in the dark. 2 hours later, she finally came home, and I could tell right away she'd seen my car in the garage. She'd done a quick touch-up in the driveway, and when she walked in, her face held that strange mix of surprise and concern. The first thing she asked was why I was back so early, with this forced little frown. I kept it light, played around with her greeting, but she wasn't in the mood. Monica's forehead twitched as she explained, "If I'd known you were coming home tonight, I'd have cooked something nice." Then she went on, almost like an afterthought, about how she'd ordered pizza for the kids and spent the evening having wine and sandwiches downtown with Shannon. She avoided my eyes when she brought up Shannon, saying, "Remember her? I've mentioned her before." Despite knowing better, I played along, nodding. Monica tossed in this casual, almost mocking reference to Shannon. Yeah, that blonde with the big chest that's always got a following. And I had to laugh a little, thinking Monica could round up an entire football team just by walking into a room, and not just because of her appeal to married women. Shannon was a stunner, in her mid-20s, with the kind of figure that turns heads, especially with her shapely chest. She'd been working at the insurance company with Monica for about a year, and they'd become fast friends. Monica was 39 but still looked amazing, blonde, with curves in all the right places and just a few more pounds than when we first met. She still looked like $1,000,000, and until tonight, she'd always been mine alone. Or so I thought. Even though her expression looked a bit strained, Monica put on this act of staying calm. Meanwhile, I felt like I could barely stand, so I just mumbled that I was tired and going straight to bed. She gave me this quick, almost habitual peck on the lips as I passed her on my way up the stairs, but I could swear I tasted the leftovers of her so-called fun on her mouth. I lay in bed, but sleep was nowhere to be found. A little while later, with the kids already asleep, I heard her talking in hushed tones on the phone, and it didn't take much to realize she was on with Shannon. The conversation was brief, but my heart sank when I heard her head straight to the shower after. Whether she was suddenly more paranoid or thought I was already out cold, I didn't know. But that night, the pit in my stomach only deepened. The rest of the weekend passed with as little interaction as possible. Monica tried suggesting a nice family dinner Saturday night, but I just shrugged her off, saying I wasn't in the mood and walking out of the room. She had to know something was up. I rarely acted coldly toward her. By Monday morning, I decided enough was enough. At work, I approached my boss, Mark, and asked for a day off, citing personal issues. With his own divorce 10 years behind him and a new marriage 5 years in, he must have sensed what was going on with the Masons. He didn't hesitate to grant the day off and, with a look of quiet sympathy, slipped me a card with his divorce lawyer's contact info. "I'm sorry to hear things have gone this way with Monica," he said, his tone somber. I thanked him and admitted I, too, had thought our marriage would last. Following his suggestion, I set up a meeting with a lawyer a couple of days later. Though she was all business, there was a hint of empathy in her approach, offering gentle words of advice. She seemed almost surprised when I told her I wouldn't be hiring a private investigator to dig up proof of Monica's affair. "We live in a no-fault state," she explained, "so evidence wouldn't really change anything in the eyes of the court." She did mention that visitation rights could be a potential issue, but reassured me it likely wouldn't be a problem. Back at home, I could hardly stand being in the same space as Monica and the girls. Monica probably sensed it. We barely spoke, and even the kids noticed how quiet things had become. I gave Monica more than enough chances to open up, but she never took them. Finally, the situation hit a breaking point when Monica got served at her office the following week. Call it petty, but I wanted her to feel at least a fraction of what I'd been feeling. Judging by the flood of missed calls from her that started at exactly 11:05 a.m., I'd say she was served right around 11:03. Ignoring all 15 of her calls, along with a few from unknown numbers, probably her friends, I went about my day feeling lighter than I had in weeks. That first taste of freedom was strangely energizing. When I got home at 5:30, her car was already parked in the garage. She wasted no time making her presence known, furious over being served in front of her coworkers. I ignored her until we were inside, where the girls were in the living room, fully engrossed in a movie. Calmly, I told her I just wanted her to be served in good company, seeing as Shannon's loyalty meant so much to her. Instantly, her anger morphed into tears, and I let out a bitter chuckle. When she tried to downplay it, I pressed her for answers. How long had this been going on, and when exactly did she plan to clue me in? She finally admitted it had been around 6 months, and that they'd been planning to let me know soon. Monica's confidence crumbled in a matter of seconds, and she slumped into a chair at the kitchen table. I walked over to our liquor cabinet, grabbed the Buffalo Trace bourbon, poured myself a solid double, and sat down across from her. If looks could kill, Monica wouldn't have lasted 2 seconds. I stared her down, and for once, she couldn't bring herself to look away from the table. In a quiet, steady voice, I asked her how she'd kept this part of herself hidden for so long. She looked up and said she'd only recently discovered this side of herself. "It just happened," she claimed. as though that should explain everything. She met my gaze then, holding it with an intensity that surprised me. She said she still loved me, that this new part of herself didn't have to change things between us. She asked for my understanding, for time to explore what she was feeling, insisting that it was finally her turn. Her words hung in the air, but I was already a million miles away, watching the life I'd known crumble around me. I told her I couldn't believe 6 months hadn't been enough for her exploration. I reminded her that if she truly loved me, she'd remember the vows we took, vows that didn't leave room for exploring with someone else. To me, fidelity wasn't about who it was with. It went beyond that. She shouldn't have entertained this, no matter who the other person was. She shot back that real love would allow for forgiveness after a mistake. I countered, saying a mistake happens once. 6 months? That's a choice. I was frustrated beyond words, making it clear that love didn't give her a free pass to shatter my heart and jeopardize the family we built. She snapped back, claiming it was about discovering her feelings toward women, accusing me of just whining. I told her she'd turned into someone I hardly recognized, someone who'd thrown everything away, and that her love for me now felt more like an affection one has for a pet. I went further, calling out her love for Shannon, that I'd clearly become second place in her life. She denied it, but I told her to stop pretending. I'd seen enough to know exactly where her heart was. Guilt flashed across her face, and it hit her then that I'd seen them together. She tried to backtrack, but I shut it down. Knowing she loved someone else hurt more than anything. I told her it would almost be easier if it had been another man. At least then, I could face him. She asked if we could be civil, and I gave a bitter laugh, saying I'd try, but the reality was that she'd fallen in love with someone who ultimately took her from me. Months went by, and I discovered the kids hadn't figured out what was going on. They thought Aunt Shannon was just a close friend of their mom's, someone who shared quick kisses and affectionate touches here and there. Since it was Aunt Shannon and not a man, they didn't see it as strange. I found this out one night over dinner when they mentioned how much more time Shannon had been spending at the house since I'd moved out. Apparently, they'd picked up on some clues and guessed Shannon was part of why Monica and I were splitting up. Since we lived in a no-fault state, our finances were split evenly. Monica got the house until the kids went off to college, and of course, I was on the hook for child support. I moved into an apartment about 15 minutes away, feeling like the world I knew had caved in. Monica and I stayed in contact through the kids, and despite everything, we worked to support them in all their activities. For reasons I still don't understand, Monica fought the divorce at every turn, dragging the whole ordeal out over a year before it was finalized. I kept things civil, especially at events for the kids. If I saw her and Shannon at a school function or a birthday party, I was polite, no more, no less. Whenever there was a family gathering, I'd make my apologies, knowing I was missing out on memories, but unwilling to face them together. I'd celebrate the kids' birthdays and Christmas on my own, giving gifts and spending time with them on separate days. Naturally, the friends we had before we married stayed with us, while most of the friends we'd made together stuck with Monica. One of the husbands once explained that things felt awkward now, especially since I'd lost my wife to another woman. Somehow, it seemed like people believed I deserved it, and a few of our married women friends almost said as much. I didn't put up a fight. I let them go, realizing that tough times reveal who your true friends are. For the first few years, I stayed away from dating. My heart just wasn't ready for it, and I wasn't in the mood for much conversation either. After a year of going it alone, I went to the local animal shelter and decided I'd take home a dog who'd been waiting there the longest. I asked them to show me 3 dogs who'd been overlooked time and again. I chose a quiet, reserved German shepherd who'd been waiting there since he was a puppy, growing lonelier with each passing year. We understood each other. Both of us were discarded, rejected. His name was Bob. Not a cute dog name, nothing fancy, just Bob. Bob and I clicked instantly. The moment we got back to my apartment, he sniffed around, then hopped on the couch beside me and curled up. He was great with the girls when they came over on weekends, but I think he preferred when it was just the two of us. We'd go on walks or take drives, and I'd talk to him about anything and everything. Bob was mostly quiet, but his attentive face and perked ears told me he was listening. A few years later, Emily met a guy from Boston in college, and they decided to get married. By then, I'd built a solid career in engineering and was able to give her the wedding of her dreams. Walking her down the aisle was one of my proudest moments, though she gave me a hard time afterward for messing up my one line. I'd realized I'd flubbed it during rehearsal, but when the real moment came, my voice cracked under the weight of it all. Trying to pull myself together, I answered the question about who was giving Monica away with a simple "I" instead of the proper "her mother and I." Nearly choked on my words right there. When I took my seat in the front row beside Monica, she leaned toward me and whispered that it was disgusting, a comment that only added to my discomfort. Shannon, sitting next to her, leaned forward, giving me a bold glare, and with just a twitch of my lips, I silently mouthed for her to let it go, glancing at the pastor to make sure he hadn't noticed our exchange. Weddings tend to dredge up memories for me, and for a split second, I looked back fondly on my own wedding day. But that pleasant recollection only lasted a moment before my mind shifted to the image of Monica and Shannon together in that restaurant, right where I discovered them. When I snapped back to reality, Monica was looking at me with a strange sadness on her face. She quickly looked away, cheeks flushed. I wasn't the only one on a stroll down memory lane. Though I wasn't watching them closely, I noticed Monica and Shannon were laughing, mingling, and enjoying themselves alongside Emily, her new husband Chris, and just about everyone else. It hit me that I was one of the few single people over 50 in the room, which only deepened the loneliness I'd been trying to ignore. Feeling the sting, I headed to the open bar and ordered a shot of 18-year-old Irish whiskey, then sat at my table, silently giving myself credit for pulling off such a grand event. 3 years later, it was time to play the role of father of the bride again when my youngest, Hannah, got engaged. This time, I decided not to face things alone. I started making more of an effort to meet people. One night, after returning from a 3-day work trip, I stopped by a small bar and grill about an hour from my apartment. Normally, I'd avoid these places. I'm not a fan of country western music, but they had pork barbecue on special, so I gave it a shot. The food was fantastic, and around 8 p.m., as the DJ started up, I scanned the room, thinking I might strike up a conversation. Just then, this striking woman walked in, a beautiful black woman in her early 30s, with a face that could have belonged to an angel. I wondered what a gorgeous young woman like her was doing here alone, especially at this time. And then there I was, the lone older guy. She was probably too young for me, but what the hell? I signaled to the bartender to put her drink on my tab. When he let her know, she looked over, walked up to my table, and thanked me. I invited her to sit, and to my surprise, she accepted, introducing herself as Maya. We had a nice evening, and then out of nowhere, she invited me back to her place. A bit surprised, I agreed, and we were just about to leave when a man in a cowboy hat walked up, greeted Maya with a light kiss on the cheek, and introduced himself as her husband, Tom. I stopped in my tracks, but Maya assured me he was fine with it. Tom even smiled, mentioning that they were both open-minded. Feeling uneasy, I told them I wasn't interested in whatever arrangement they had, mumbled something about the younger generation, and headed for my car alone. Still hoping for some companionship, I decided to look closer to home, turning to my church. I met Linda, a 50-year-old divorcee with long black hair, a lean figure, and a warm smile. We hit it off, and after a few dates, we ended up back at my apartment. But midway through the evening, she started muttering her ex-husband Dan's name, which only got louder with each, let's say, peek. I stopped, letting her know I wasn't Dan, but instead of apologizing, she got irritated, asking why I'd stopped. I drove her home in silence, and let's just say there was no fifth date. Next, I invited a coworker, Rachel Carter, over for dinner and dancing. Rachel was a lively 42-year-old blonde with a warm personality and a slightly curvy figure. We'd been friends for about 10 years, and by then, we'd shared our stories, the ups and downs of our lives post-divorce. That evening turned into a few more wonderful ones, and we genuinely enjoyed each other's company even before any romance entered the picture. With Hannah's wedding coming up, I invited Rachel to be my date. She hesitated, saying she wasn't sure it would be a good idea, given the dynamics with Monica. I told her that the real approval needed would be from my trusty wingman, Bob, my 45-pound German Shepherd mix. If Bob liked her, she was in. She found it odd, laughingly calling me one strange man. But, sure enough, she passed Bob's test, and the girls were thrilled I wouldn't be going solo. Monica, however, seemed anything but pleased, giving us sour looks whenever Rachel was around. I did my best to ignore it, but Rachel could feel Monica's coldness and was a bit rattled by it. At the rehearsal dinner, I caught Monica alone and finally decided to address the issue head-on. "What exactly is your problem?" I asked, keeping my voice low but firm. With sarcasm dripping from her voice, Monica mocked my relationship with Rachel, suggesting I'd stooped to dating Girl Scouts. I shot back that jealousy wasn't her best look and reminded her that Rachel was actually the same age as she and Shannon. I even joked that she traded me in for a younger, female model, which earned me a reluctant smirk from her. A year later, Rachel and I were married, and life moved forward. Out of the blue one day at work, I got a call reminding me that I was still on the bone marrow registry. After 30 years, I was finally a match for someone. The thought of potentially saving a life was thrilling, and while I knew the procedure would be a bit inconvenient, I was more than ready. They explained further testing was needed, and if all went well, the procedure would be scheduled in about 2 weeks. Without hesitation, I agreed. I wouldn't say I'm overly religious, but there's that saying about God working in mysterious ways. I didn't think much about it until 4 days later, during my usual weekly call with my oldest daughter, Emily. Normally, Hannah and I steer clear of discussing Monica's life, but Emily mentioned that they'd found a bone marrow donor for Aunt Shannon, and both she and Monica were pretty involved in the process. I told Emily to pass along my best to Shannon and Monica, adding that despite what they'd done, I didn't wish them harm. Emily paused, suggesting that as an adult, I could deliver those well wishes myself. I acknowledged that, but added that the less I spoke to them, the less chance there was of me saying something I'd regret later. Emily pointed out that I'd been married to Rachel nearly 2 years now and urged me to make peace with the divorce. I admitted I was happy now, though I wasn't exactly friending Monica on social media. Still, I thought a small gesture wouldn't hurt, so I decided to send Monica a bouquet with a card wishing Shannon well. As I placed the order, a thought nagged at me. Bone marrow matches aren't exactly common, and the timing of Shannon finding one just when I had was oddly convenient. Curious, I called my registry contact, playing it casual, and asked if it was possible my match was someone nearby. Her voice stumbled, and finally, she admitted it was rare for someone to identify their match but didn't deny it. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I was being matched to donate to Shannon, the very woman who had taken Monica from me. The anger simmered as I thought about it. Here was the woman who broke my family apart, and now she expected me to be her savior. I made up my mind. I wasn't going to go through with it. 2 days later, I called the registry back and formally withdrew from the donation. My contact sounded close to tears, pleading softly, saying it almost never happened that someone backed out, and it would be a big disappointment to everyone involved. I apologized but stood firm, saying it was in my best interest. She left the door open, saying to call if I changed my mind soon. When I told Rachel I'd declined, she was furious. She didn't know I'd found out the donation was intended for Shannon. She only knew I'd backed out after agreeing to help save a life. I'd never seen her this upset before, practically yelling at me, asking why I'd gone back on my word to help someone in need. For the first time, I saw Rachel really lose her cool. So, I came clean, explaining that if I'd known it was for Shannon, I would have chosen not to participate from the start. Rachel wasn't having it, accusing me of withholding a life-saving chance out of spite. "It's not revenge," I countered, "but I have every right to distance myself from Monica and Shannon after everything they put me through." Rachel looked at me, shocked, asking if they were aware I was involved. I assured her everything was anonymous, and I only found out by coincidence. As I explained, her expression softened, but she still urged me to reconsider. She told me that no matter what happened, I couldn't turn down the chance to save a life, even if it was Shannon's. "You're a better man than this," she whispered, saying that guilt would haunt me, no matter what I thought now. I disagreed, reminding her how much pain Monica and Shannon had caused. "They'll never even know it was me," I said. But Rachel persisted, concerned that my decision could crush the hope they'd found. The rift between us grew as we continued to disagree, and I felt us drifting apart. At one point, Rachel mentioned Christian charity, to which I asked if that meant blindly giving to those who've hurt me. She rolled her eyes, calling me ridiculous. I explained that what they did went beyond hurt. They tore out my heart and flipped my world upside down. I wasn't ready to simply set that aside and play hero for them after nearly 2 decades. Monica had been married to Shannon longer than she'd been with me. I suggested Rachel come to terms with that. Rachel wouldn't let it go, insisting that Monica and Shannon had made their choices long ago. I quietly replied that, to me, their fate was out of my hands. I didn't care whether they lived or didn't. A few days later, on a Saturday afternoon, I mentioned to Rachel that I was heading out to the shooting range to blow off some steam. She reminded me to be back before dinner since the girls were coming and didn't want me reeking of gunpowder, telling me to shower first. At the range, I unloaded 500 rounds with my 9mm, each shot landing squarely on the target. There's something about the focused shooting requires that calms me. When the concentration finally eases, my whole body relaxes. And, just as Rachel predicted, I came home smelling like gunpowder. I showered quickly, noticing she'd set the table for 6 and that the delicious aroma of roast filled the air. Rachel's a great cook, and I was hoping for her signature roasted potatoes over mashed. After I cleaned up, I poured myself a glass of rye and brought her a glass of wine. She looked a bit on edge, which I chalked up to her wanting the dinner to go smoothly for the girls and their husbands. I kissed her and then went to the living room to read while waiting for everyone to arrive. But when the door finally opened, my daughters were accompanied not by their husbands, but by Monica and a worn-looking Shannon. My heart sank. I glanced sharply at Rachel, realizing immediately that she'd set this up as some sort of intervention. The sight of Monica and Shannon in my home stirred up old wounds. I thought about just grabbing my phone and walking out, but something held me back. I was done being ambushed. Dinner began, and of course, Shannon's illness was the main topic, though I said nothing, keeping my expression unreadable as I half-heartedly ate. Once dinner and dessert were over, I offered everyone a drink and moved us to the living room, where an uncomfortable silence filled the air. Finally, I decided to break it. "Who wants to speak first?" I asked, scanning each face. The woman who betrayed my trust by orchestrating this ambush, the woman who tore my heart out years ago and now expects me to do her a favor, or maybe the one who took a married woman from her husband and now needs help to survive? One by one, the women looked down, unable to meet my gaze. Rachel looked hopeful when I said her name, but it was my oldest, Emily, who took the initiative. She acknowledged my lingering resentment toward Monica and Shannon, but called my refusal to donate bone marrow petty and immature, saying it was beneath me to deny someone's chance at life out of spite. She argued that this wasn't some small vendetta like throwing a pie in someone's face. This was life and death. I took a slow sip of rye, set the glass down, and shook my head. "Every action has consequences," I said firmly. Monica and Shannon never imagined the fallout would be this severe, but now they're trying to turn their problem into mine. They see this as revenge, but to me, it's a rare chance to take back a shred of self-respect. After all, how much dignity would I have if I saved the person who ripped my marriage apart? I looked at each one of them, unyielding. And don't think this is about Shannon being a woman. If her name were Carl and he was a 200-pound guy who stole my wife, you'd all likely see my side a bit more clearly. But that doesn't matter to me. Shannon is a wife stealer, and she knew exactly what she was doing. Shannon sat across from me, staring intently at the floor, while Monica reached over, placing a gentle hand on hers. My voice dropped, cold and controlled. This isn't revenge, it's hatred. I can't stand the thought of helping Shannon, and I have no reason to. In the 17 years she was with Monica, I hardly said a word to her. Why should I start now? Monica's face crumpled, tears welling up as she asked if I hated her so much that I'd let someone else suffer because of it. She pleaded, reminding me of the love we once shared, urging me to think of it as a noble act. I looked at her with incredulity, calling out her warped sense of honor. Honor? I scoffed. You don't get to lecture me on what honor is, Monica. My voice rose despite my effort to keep calm. I was fighting to stay composed. feeling the urge to tell every one of them, including Rachel, to go to hell and leave me in peace. I took a few deep breaths, but Rachel seemed intent on pushing me further, quietly insisting I was a good person who always did the right thing. She reminded me that running away now wasn't in my nature and that I'd never forgive myself if I didn't help. Emily joined in, pointing out that I'd raised her and Hannah to always do what was right, even when it felt wrong. I told them that, for me, refusing this was exactly what would give me peace, letting me avoid the kind of regret that keeps a person awake at night. Then Shannon, almost desperate, spoke up, pleading with me not to let her die. She admitted that she knew how I felt, but explained her chances were slim without my donation. Her eyes had that haunted look, and it couldn't have been easy for her to ask me for help. I looked right into those haunted eyes and made my decision final. No, I said, plainly and without apology, because honestly, I wasn't sorry. I wasn't going to move a muscle to help her. Shannon handled my response better than Monica, who broke down in tears. Rachel moved over to comfort them, whispering something like, "I'll try. I'll talk to him." She didn't even seem to realize the strain this had put on our own marriage. Walking out, I grabbed my keys and left 5 women crying in that room. I didn't come back for 3 days, ignoring every call and text from Rachel and the girls. When I returned, the house was dark, and a quick look around told me Rachel had probably gone to stay somewhere else temporarily. Some of her clothes and a suitcase were gone, but most things remained as they were. I packed my own suitcase, taking most of my clothes and a few belongings, and left my wedding ring on the kitchen table. 3 days later, I got a call at work, anonymous, but it was Rachel. She was in disbelief that our relationship was falling apart over what she called a refusal to be the world's biggest fool. I shot back, equally shocked that I'd married someone who could betray my trust so completely. I added that maybe if anyone was exacting revenge here, it wasn't me but perhaps a higher power. I referenced the line, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord," and finished by saying she'd really let me down. 2 months after our divorce was finalized, I found out Shannon had passed. I learned about it through a short obituary in the local paper, and neither of my daughters had kept me updated on her condition. My decision had created a rift between my daughters and me that didn't seem likely to heal. But I still stood by it. I'd made the right choice for myself, and not once did I lose sleep over refusing to donate my bone marrow to Shannon. The folks at the registry weren't sympathetic to my personal situation, either. They removed me from the list, which I accepted. The odds of finding another match were slim, and I'd come to terms with that. Meanwhile, Bob, my loyal German shepherd, wasn't thrilled with any of the women I'd dated here and there over the past year. But that was fine by me. At 62, I wasn't particularly on the hunt for wife number 3. Surprisingly, I'd found a fair bit of companionship, and I learned that the dating odds at my age actually favored me. Eligible women seemed to outnumber men nearly 4 to 1, and with good health, my dates were usually up for a good time. Although we had to be careful to avoid anything that might result in a broken hip, I lightheartedly called these women my handsome singletons. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family for more than 4 years when my youngest, Hannah, called to tell me Monica had passed away. She said she thought I should know and invited me to the funeral. We'd had 15 good years together and raised 2 daughters, so I figured it was only right to pay my respects. Maybe it would help rebuild some connection with my girls, too. At the funeral, I sat quietly in the back. It was a nice ceremony. Afterward, I approached the girls and their families, receiving tentative hugs from my daughters, handshakes from their husbands, and shy greetings from my 3 grandkids. We decided to head to a nearby restaurant to catch up. Within minutes, though, Emily broke the silence with a pointed question about why I had let Aunt Shannon die. I sighed, noting how little the conversation had changed in 4 years. She was a wife thief, I said firmly, adding that this was the last time I'd be discussing it. Trying to change the topic, I gestured toward a young man at the bar, posing a hypothetical. "What if he kissed you, Emily?" Chris, her husband, didn't hesitate. He said he'd beat the guy to a pulp, and when I asked what he'd do if the man had an affair with Emily, he replied he'd already be dead. I used that as a parallel, pointing out that if the guy was dead, Chris wouldn't be worrying about donating bone marrow to save him. Chris nodded, finally understanding where I was coming from. I went on to say that I didn't save Shannon's life partly because she was a woman, a detail that might have softened people's views. But if it had been a man who'd stolen my wife, they'd probably see things differently. Chris started to get it, and as he looked around, I could see the realization settling in each of them. With a quiet voice, I confessed that while I wasn't proud of my decision, I wasn't ashamed either. I explained that Shannon didn't deserve my compassion after taking away the love of my life. Hannah looked at me, hurt, asking how I could withhold compassion if I'd ever loved her mom. I told her that while I had loved her mother deeply, when she shattered my heart, much of that love turned bitter. I wasn't a monster, I told them, just a man dealing with pain in the best way I knew how. I acknowledged that things hadn't ended well for Monica or for Shannon, but karma, I believed, had finally caught up to them both. The room fell silent, and I noticed tears in the eyes of the adults while the grandkids looked on, confused and a little anxious. I knew it would take time for us all to come to terms with what had happened, so I suggested we focus on moving forward and let the past rest. Life, after all, goes on.